Hello, everyone, and welcome to Lunch Break Science. I'm Ariel Johnson from the Leakey Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting human evolution research and sharing discoveries in programs like this. We'd like to thank Anna Gordon Getty and Camilla and George Smith, whose generous support has made this episode of Lunch Break Science possible. Here with us today is Leakey Foundation grant recipient, Dr. Caroline Schuppli. Caroline, thank you so much for being here with us today and helping us celebrate International Orangutan Day, which was yesterday.
Yeah, hi everybody. Thank you for joining us, and thanks for having me, Ariel.
Caroline is joining us from Zurich in Switzerland, where she is a researcher at the University of Zurich. She's also a researcher at the University of Leipzig in Germany and director of the research at the Suwak Research Station in Gunung Leuser National Park in South Aceh, Sumatra. She works with orangutan populations there and studies the behavior of the wild Sumatran orangutans. But she and her colleagues also work to protect the unique habitats in which they live. Today, she'll be discussing her work studying the early social and environmental factors that impact learning in orangutans. Before we hear from Caroline, though, for those of you watching us live on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, we'll actually be calling on you a little bit later to participate in a little quiz. So I'm going to give you a warning, and there'll be a banner that comes up, and after that, you can post your answer in the chat. So our first question, is so far in Lunch Break Science, we've looked at chimpanzee behavior and baboon behavior. What is different about orangutans? Why are we interested in studying them?
Yeah, so I think for me, one of the most intriguing things about orangutans is that they develop so slowly. So it takes immature orangutans 8 to 10 years until they're ready to leave their moms. And even after they leave their mothers, they take another 6 to 7 years as juveniles before they start reproducing. And that long period of immaturity just gives them a lot of time to learn. And during this time, you can actually also see how these skills in these individuals develop. So the downside, of course, of them being slow is that you have very few individuals to study. So sample sizes are very small, but the ones that you observe, you can really see those changes very well. And you can also see individual differences between them.
It must be very different to study them in the field. What is a day in the field like?
Yeah, so I will present data today that were collected at 2 field sites. So at the Swak in Sumatra and Tuanan in Borneo. I'll mainly focus on Swak, which is here at the Lembang River, because this is where I spend most of my time when I'm in the field. Yeah, and when we follow an orangutan, it has usually been followed the day before, so we have the location of its nest already. We want to get to the nest shortly before 6, which is when they get up. So we have to get up at between 3:30 and 5, cross the river on a canoe, and then walk to the nest of the orangutan. And because Swak is a swamp forest, walking often looks like this. And at the nest, we then just wait for the orangutan to get up. Once it's up, we follow it, collect our behavioral, GPS, and many other types of data. And then at like 6 to 7 p.m., it will build its new nest, and we mark the nest, go back to camp, and then we download all the data, and we try to eat and sleep, and then it's just repeat. Yeah, and the research at SWAC was started by Karl van Schaik in the 80s. So what you just saw was the first team at SWAC. Nowadays, SWAC is a monitoring station of the Sumatran Orangutan Conservation Program. It's wooden houses on stilts because we get a lot of floodings. And we get food delivered to camp via the river around once a week.
That's really remote,
It is remote, but I also hear of other field sites that seem to be even more remote. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the most important things in the field are our local field assistants who have been working for us for many years. They're actually collecting data as we speak. So they have continued working at SWAC while all the researchers and my students had to go home because of COVID. Yeah, and these 6 are the leading staff members at the moment at SWAC. And the Swak orangutans are special in many ways. So they use tools, like on these pictures here, they use these stick tools. in many different contexts, but they're also more sociable than usual orangutans. So they like to spend time together. They're very tolerant when they're together, and they can do this because there is a lot to eat in the swag forest all year round. And this is also why the swag orangutans can get quite chubby, like the female in the picture here. Yeah, and these are actually the individuals I follow for 10 years already in Sumatra and Borneo. So these were the 25 immatures and their 15 mothers that I've been observing over the last few years.
So you get to watch these adorable orangutans grow up. We're going to have that viewer quiz now. We'd like all of our viewers to try their hands at orangutan identification. So Caroline will share a photo of a baby orangutan, and we'd like you to all carefully observe the characteristics of that orangutan. And guess which one of the 3 young orangutans on the right is the older version of the orangutan on the left. So what features make them most distinguishable from each other and would help our viewers to decide? And for our viewers out there, you can go ahead and start posting your guesses in the chat.
Yeah, so I think for me it's difficult to say because as a researcher, you kind of very quickly develop this facial recognition. And I think that's not just for orangutans, but also for other species. So, and that then works like it works with humans. So you recognize individuals, but you can't really tell why. So you can't really pin it down. But for this picture here, I would maybe say, look at his eyes and like the area around the eyes. I think that's very distinct for him.
Yeah. So, how long ago was this picture of baby Louis taken?
That's actually one of the first pictures I ever took at SWOG. So that was in October 2010. Yeah, that is, and he was also one of the first individuals that I followed. So he has now just left his mom. So I've been observing him for almost 10 years, and over the last year, he has gotten more and more independent and is now slowly leaving his mother, Lisa.
We are starting to get some of the guesses. Do we want to see some of the guesses?
Mm-hmm.
So we have 1 vote for number 2.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see what else we have. Number 2. We have another one. Number 3. Number 1.
Mm-hmm.
Number 1. Or 2. 1. Oh, see, now 1 and 2 are tied, neck and neck. Mm-hmm. Number 3. Let's see if we can, number 1. Okay, so it seems like our audience is so far guessing that it's number 1. Caroline, what is the correct answer?
So the correct answer is the one in the top left corner. I think that was, number 1.
Number 1. So for those of you who guessed number 1, you are correct.
Yeah, and if you want to see how the other individuals looked when they were babies, that's how they looked like.
They're all so incredibly adorable. I love those little mohawks.
Yeah. The special thing about Louis is that he was quite bald when he was born. Yeah, but he has grown his hair in the meantime.
So now that we have kind of learned a little bit of what your field site's like and learned about identifying orangutans, let's hear about your research.
So
those orangutans, they're so adorable, and they're just the little ones. They're just so cute. Okay, I will let you take over from here.
Okay. So yeah, I'm going to show you some of the results on social learning that we got on our orangutans. So as I already said, orangutans develop very slowly. The female orangutans start to reproduce only when they're between 15 and 16 years old, and mothers nurse their infants until those are around 7 to 8 years old. And at the same time, orangutans also have very expansive skill repertoires. They have very broad repertoires. Adult orangutans, for example, eat more than 200 different food items, and each of these items takes a different way of processing. and they also have a lot of complex skills, like, for example, some populations have tool use, like the guy on the picture down there is doing. So this means that immature orangutans have to learn a lot. And what distinguishes orangutans from the other great apes is that they have this semi-solitary lifestyle. So populations of orangutans actually differ in how sociable they are, but they all show some degree of fission-fusion sociability, which means that they split up and meet again and again. And that means that individuals rely on their own knowledge for a large fraction of time and cannot resort to the knowledge of other individuals. And so one of the big orangutan mysteries is, why do they develop so slowly, or why is this weaning so late? And our previous research suggested that this may be partly because of skill acquisition. So if you look at how skills develop in orangutans, you can see that it just takes a lot of time. So these are feeding rates over age in years, and the feeding rates are in percentage of the mother's feeding rate. So 100% means adult-like values, and these are only reached around the age of 7 to 9, 10 years. And this is actually exactly when weaning takes place, or shortly after weaning takes place. And interestingly, also at the population where skills are more complex and where there's more to learn, weaning seems to happen later, at least for the individuals in this data set. So this timing of weaning coinciding with skill competence, of course, suggests that as soon as individuals have acquired all the skills they need, they are ready to leave their moms. And so if you think about this, ape mothers are expected to support skill acquisition of their offspring, because they would benefit from their infants acquiring their skills faster, because that would mean that they could have their next baby earlier. But what we actually find is that ape mothers are surprisingly passive role models. So there is very limited evidence for active teaching, which is very unlike humans. Humans actively teach their kids, but for a long time we only had anecdotal evidence for teaching in apes. But over the last few years, there are more and more studies that showed that chimpanzees in the wild show some behavioral patterns that match the definition of functional teaching or teaching-like behaviors. So these chimpanzee mothers, they would share, for example, tools, or they would scaffold learning opportunities during nut cracking with their infants. And so this sharing of the tools, for example, in chimpanzees, that can be on request of the infant, or it can be totally proactive, initiated by the mother. And to date, we don't really know whether this is also happening in the orangutans. So to go one step back, one of the big questions of my research, or our research, was that whether orangutans, or how orangutans acquire their skills, and what role social learning plays in that skill acquisition. And to investigate this, we looked at peering behavior. And peering is attentive and sustained close-range watching of the activities of a conspecific. Peering looks like this. So here we can see Lisa, one of our adult females. She has just brought up some food from the ground. And from top, you can see Louis, the little kid that you actually just identified. And he's getting into position and peers. So this is what we call peering in orangutans. And it's very distinct behavior. It can last from anything from 5 seconds to several minutes. We see most peering in infant orangutans, but also juveniles here. And sometimes even adult orangutans peer. And it's quite distinct also because orangutans usually like to keep their distance, but if they peer, they are really in each other's faces. Yeah, so we found a lot of evidence that this peering behavior is actually used for social learning. So we, for example, found that peering is followed by selective practice of the observed behavior. So if you look at exploration rates of infants with the object before, the object that the demonstrator is feeding on before and after the peering event, you can see that these exploration rates significantly increase after peering. So after peering, infants are 3 times more likely to explore the object the demonstrator is feeding on than before peering. We also found that peering rates increase with increasing complexity of the food item. So the more steps it takes to process a food item, the more frequently immature orangutans peer. Processing step 0 means that you can just pluck and eat the item as a whole, and then the more I'm realizing that I didn't share my slides properly. Okay, so the more you move to the right on this graph, the more steps it takes to process the item, like for example, peeling a fruit or spitting out seeds. And we found the reverse effect of item frequency on peering rates. So the more frequent a food item is in the mother's diet, the less immature orangutans peer. And so together, this means that orangutans peer for things that are complex and that are rare. And that's, of course, exactly what you would expect if peering was a means to social learning. So from the learner's perspective, we can say that it seems like peering is used as means to social learning. Immature orangutans seem to use a mix between observational social learning and selective practice of what they have seen. But what about the involvement of the mother in this learning process? To study the involvement of the mother in the learning process, we looked at food solicitation. So around 15% of these peering events are followed by food solicitation behavior, which is attempting to take the food item of another individual by reaching for it or by using other gestures. For this, we have another video. Yeah, so here you can see another female, Rafi, with her son, and he's just reaching for her mouth.
We're experiencing a brief technical difficulty, so we will be back in just a moment. We are back, so we will turn the lecture back over to you.
Okay, so where did we stop? Where did I lose you guys?
We were just after the video.
Just after the video.
Cut out. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you all for your patience.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, transitioning, to all of us doing online events like this, there are always, some little issues that come up. So, but yeah, that was a pretty quick. So, let me get your slides back up and turn it back over.
Perfect. So yeah, I don't know how much you heard or saw of the video, but it was just a classic food sharing event recorded at SWAC. So an immature individual taking food from its mom. And so a previous study already suggested that these food solicitation events are actually a way through which orangutans learn about food. They found some similar patterns as we found for peering. But these food solicitation events, they're more interactive than peering. So they also allow us to study the involvement of the mother in the skill learning process. And so what we found for these food solicitation events, so I should probably mention that these are very new results. One of my students in Leipzig, Miki, she looked at a newly compiled data set on these food solicitation events. It's more than 1,000 events collected over 13 years at SWAC from many different individuals. And so what we found is orangutan mothers adjust the level of tolerance over the infant's age. And peak tolerance means successful food transfers. So peak tolerance is reached around the same time where immature orangutans acquire their feeding skills, so between the ages of 1 and 8 years. Interestingly, we also found some evidence for an effect of the offspring's sex on food share or on tolerance of the mom. So we found preliminary evidence that orangutan mothers are more tolerant to their sons during early infancy, but then more tolerant to their daughters during late infancy and juvenility. But we still have to see how much this result is influenced by that point here to the right and by the unequal data distribution. What we also found is that orangutan mothers adjust their level of tolerance according to the difficulty of the food that the infants are soliciting. So as you can see, the more difficult it is to process the food, the more tolerant the mothers are during food solicitations. Interestingly, we found no effect of food item frequency on the mother's tolerance levels. So to sum up, it looks like orangutan mothers adjust their behavior, so they share food more likely during the time that the infants are learning their feeding skills, and they're more likely to share if the food is difficult to process. And this suggests that they adjust their behavior in a way that facilitates learning in their offspring. So infant orangutans seem to actively seek and realize learning opportunities. They do this mix between observational and independent learning. The mothers adjust their behaviors in a way that scaffolds learning opportunities. But interestingly, we see very little proactive sharing in orangutans. So unlike the chimps, in the orangutans, almost all the events we had were initiated by the offspring. So the mothers rarely just hand over food items by themselves. And so these are very new results, and there are many future directions that we're going to explore. We're going to, for example, see how this scaffolding of learning opportunities affects learning speed in the immatures, and how these differences in learning speed then relate to the weaning age of the immatures. Yeah, that's actually it. So I want to thank everybody at the Leakey Foundation for letting me speak here today, especially John, who suggested me, and Ariel for coordinating and moderating this. I also want to thank, of course, my mentors and supervisors, my Indonesian counterparts, colleagues, again, the student and the field staff who are just doing an amazing job, and the funding agencies, which again include the Leakey Foundation, and everybody at the SWAC project.
Yeah, John Mitani is on our science executive committee. He's one of the co-chairs, and he's been really integral to kind of forming this program. So yeah, hopefully you're watching, John. So for our live viewing audience, please go ahead and submit any questions you have in the chat. To start off, I'm going to ask a question that I was thinking about as you were talking. So social learning is clearly very important in acquiring skills. With so many schools pivoting to distance learning due to COVID-19, is there anything we can learn from your research that would help, kind of inform, especially for younger students who are not in that kind of engaging social environment that they used to be in, to kind of, learn about that? Yeah.
Yeah, so I would say the orangutan results, they just show that learning is a social activity, and that social learning is always preferred over independent learning. I think that's an ape universal. So even the least sociable of all apes, the orangutans, they prefer to learn from each other. And so I would say in times like these, it's just important to try to keep that social element up. But also what I also see in orangutans is that they learn what they seem to find exciting. So when they're little, they learn from their moms because they think that she's very exciting. You can really see how they approach quickly when she's doing something, and then they shift that excitement, and they also shift their social interest. And so I would say that it's just super important to keep that social element up, but also elicit that interest, because that will facilitate learning. It will make it easier for people to remember things if there's some level of interest and excitement.
Wonderful. Do we have any questions? I think we have one question already. Do we want to pull that up?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Does human interference that occurs by studying orangutans impact them? And does it alter any evolutionary processes?
So I think the way we observe the orangutans at SWAC is not affecting them. So we go through this habituation process with the individuals where we just wait until they basically ignore us. So the perfect orangutan we study is getting out of its nest and not looking at us once a day and then the whole day and then making its nest again. So I don't think that we are interfering with the behavior of the orangutans. And if we see that an individual cannot be habituated or feels bothered by us, then we will also not follow it. We will try again and again to habituate it, but we will leave it. Yeah.
I think we're actually getting quite a few questions already. Do you want to pull up the next one? Does peering mainly occur between related individuals? And if not, is there a dominance hierarchy that influences that behavior?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. So we have the vast majority of all peering happens between them in the mother-offspring diet. So immatures peering at their moms. But we also have peering, especially when they're older, the little ones, they go peer at different role models. So there is one project that looks into how this peering might also work as a social tool. So we find a little bit that sometimes peering is used as a way to displace subordinate individuals from a tree. But the strongest patterns we still find for these learning predictions. So I would say it might have a social component or like this social function, and dominance might play a role, but the strongest result we get from the learning predictions.
Interesting. Very interesting. So we have okay. Do chimps, bonobos, and gorillas have late weaning ages also?
They do, but they are earlier than orangutans. So orangutans, a lot of chimps, I think, are weaned around the age of 5, and in orangutans, that would be, that wouldn't happen. So unless something happens to the mom, of course. But yeah, so in orangutans, I would say they're at least 2 years later than the average chimp.
Interesting. So I know when I talked to you earlier that you mentioned that your study question came before kind of linking up with studying orangutans.
Mm-hmm.
How did that kind of come about, ending up studying orangutans? And what was your first study question?
So I was just always interested in what factors alter individuals. So what factors during development affect the development of cognition of individuals. And I find orangutans especially interesting because not just because they have that long period of immaturity, but also because they have this fission-fusion system where they're not as group living as chimps, and so it's more overseeable with whom they interact, and there's just not so much going on, and you have these clear differences between individuals that some are more sociable than others. And I find just that huge variation we have in orangutans very, very interesting for answering my question. So yeah, I always thought I would study maybe gorillas or chimps, but it turned out that orangutans are the perfect study system for that question.
We'll take our next question from the audience. What do you witness mothers disciplining the juveniles?
Yeah, very, very rarely. So, but it does happen. So, for example, one event. So all these events, they're anecdotal. So there is maybe a handful of events that I can recall after observing them for 10 years. But we did have an incident where a juvenile took food that the mother was about to give to the infant, And so the juvenile kind of intervened in this food sharing process, and then the mom came, slapped the juvenile, took the food away, and gave it to the infant. But that happens very rarely.
Okay, we have another audience question. Let's see here. Are you saying that chimp mothers initiate teaching more than orangutan mothers? What is the difference in behavior?
Yeah, so we are just getting our orangutan results now, but I think from like comparing what I got from the chimp papers, it looks like orangutans are a little bit less proactive. So the reports are also the videos I've seen of chimpanzee mothers actively initiating these food transfers or tool transfers. I have only a handful of events in 10 years. So I think chimps might be more proactive, and in orangutans, it's more like the initiative of the offspring to make this food sharing happen.
Interesting. I actually think that was our last question. Let's see here. There was one. How far have orangutans come when it comes to collaborating on food sharing? That's our last question.
Okay, so food sharing, as I said, we see it in the mother-offspring context, and there is one other context where we see it, which is between adult females and adult males, and it always happens around the time when we think the female is receptive, so when she's ready to get pregnant again. And so I think orangutans, they don't share a lot they don't do that very often, but there are these two distinct contexts where they came up with this behavior and use it. But in general, it's not an orangutan thing, I would say.
Well, Caroline, thank you so much for joining us. This was a really interesting look into orangutan behavior.
Thank you for having me, and yeah, thanks everybody for watching.
We have only one more episode of Lunch Break Science in our pilot season, and we would really love to hear what you think we should do next. We have a link to share for a survey, and it will also be shared in the video description, and the link is in the chat. We would love to hear what you have to say, and hear how often. I'm really curious. Like, how often do you all want to see new episodes of Lunch Break Science coming out? So to learn more about the Leakey Foundation, you can visit us at leakeyfoundation.org. You can learn about how you can support us and research like Caroline's and educational programs like Lunch Break Science. Right now, all donations will be doubled by 2 generous donors, meaning your impact will be doubled. Next Thursday, we'll be learning about the social interactions between our genes and the environment. Be sure to subscribe to the Leakey Foundation's YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter and Facebook, or sign up to our newsletter to be the first to hear about upcoming episodes and groundbreaking discoveries in human evolution research. Still hungry for science and can't wait till next week? Check out the Leakey Foundation's award-winning podcast, Origin Stories, available wherever you listen to podcasts. Lunch Break Science is made possible by the generous support of Ann and Gordon Getty and Camilla and George Smith. Thank you all for taking a break from your day and feeding your brain with the Leakey Foundation. Until next week, stay hungry for knowledge. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.